everyone, welcome back to the Traxion YouTube channel. Now, admittedly, today's topic probably isn't the most exciting thing that you're going to watch on YouTube today, although if you're a sim racer, it's probably one of the most important, and that is practice. Is your practice as effective as it could be, and are you practicing the right things? Well, let's jump in the rig and see what it's all about. So here we are in the rig. Now, I mentioned earlier on, it's probably not the most exciting topic that you're going to listen to, but it is really, really important. And these are the steps that I go through before each race. There's a few things that we're going to cover in this video. The first thing is just regular practice, finding the best racing line around the circuit, getting your best lap time in, hitting every apex, nailing every exit, lap after lap after lap, making sure that you know the circuit well and you know the racing line, you know the quickest way around. Although, as we all know, that doesn't happen very often during the race, so we need to practice our alternate lines. So I've chosen Monza for this tutorial. Monza is a perfect example. There's lots and lots of overtaking opportunities, lots of places where you can make a mistake, and lots of places where you're often too wide. So let's go on with part one, and that is alternate lines. So what are alternate lines, I hear you ask? Well, it's exactly what it says in the tin. It's a different line to what you would normally take. So, as we all know, the perfect line through the corner, you went to the corner wide, you hit the apex, and then you go wide on exit. That's the fastest way through the turn, the path of least resistance, the optimum line. But during the race, there's lots and lots of occasions when you can't do that. So, the optimum line here going into turn one would be enter wide, into the apex, then into this apex, and then exit, run wide and exit, and accelerate. But you need to practice running the alternate line. What it's like on the outside, your braking points change slightly as you enter the turn, depending where you are on the circuit. And I'm going to explain why. So as we approach turn one on a normal lap with no traffic, optimum line, my braking marker would be round about the 150 or just after, where the grass changes colour there on the left hand side. But if there's somebody up our inside, that means that we can't take the optimum line and we have to go wider, which means our turning point is slightly later. That means we can brake slightly later, and I'm not talking by much, maybe only a car length, 2 car lengths. But if you don't do that, the guy on the inside is going to get the move done and you've got nowhere to go. You need to try and keep on the outside. So you would brake a little bit later. Normally, here, this is where I would probably start to turn in. But you can't if somebody's on your inside. So you need to turn in a bit later, which is here. So it's only about a car length, but it's enough to keep the guy on the inside so he can't then cut your nose off into the next left. And your alternate line would be round the outside, but then bear in mind it's exactly the opposite for this left turn. Our left turn is going to be much tighter than it normally would because we're not entering it from the right side of the circuit, we're entering it from the left side of the circuit. So this is really, really tight, and you need to make sure you leave room for the guy on the outside. So the alternate line would be wide round turn one, and then tight round turn 2, and then hopefully you've left enough room on the outside for the guy and you can both race on for the next battle going into the second chicane. So same scenario, but you're now the car on the inside. What is the alternate line around here? Well, it's exactly the opposite. So it's tight round turn 1 and wide round turn 2. So there's a guy on your left hand side now. You can't move over there where you normally would go. This is probably the normal braking marker, but because we're on the inside and the chicane is now tighter than it normally would be, we have to brake a little bit earlier to make sure that we get around the turn and leave him room on the outside. So we'd brake just before where we would normally brake, and you try and keep them as wide as you can, but sometimes you're going to be right over here. So this is going to be much, much tighter than it normally would. And then when you get around this turn, at this point, you would normally aim for that apex straight ahead, but you can't because there's a car there on your left side. So you've got to give him room, but that means that we're going to have a better exit because it's not as tight. His speed is compromised, and hopefully you can get a good run out there into the second chicane. Now here we're approaching Lesmo 1. Now a lot of people think that you can't get a move done around the outside, but if you follow the principles which we've just explained, if you're turning in later, if you're on the outside, that means that you can brake a fraction later, and it's all about staying alongside the car that's trying to overtake you. If you don't, if you brake where you normally do, then he's going to brake and get the move done on the inside. You've got nowhere back, you've got nowhere to go. But if you can hold the outside line, you have a chance of retaining that position. So Lesmo 1 and Lesmo 2 are perfect examples of getting a move done around the outside. So normally you would brake round about here for Lesmo 1, and it's the third gear corner. You would head over there towards the apex. But you can hold this quite wide. You've got to bear in mind though that on the outside of the circuit there's not as much rubber. iRacing has dynamic tracks which change over the course of a race, so more rubber gets put down, the grippier it gets on the racing line. So you've got to bear in mind that when you stray off that racing line, there's not as much rubber on the circuit. So, but you can get it done around the outside as long as you hold it on the outside. His line to the next Lesmo is compromised, and you can do exactly the same around this one. You've got to hold a wide line, give them room, but because we're on the outside, the radius of the turn isn't as tight for us as it is for the guy on the inside. So in theory, you should get a better exit. Get on the gas a little bit sooner. So going down to Parabolica, again, this is another big overtaking place here at Monza. Anywhere where there's a long turn which opens up on exit, it's a great overtaking opportunity, but it's also a great opportunity for you to then retake that position on exit. Now, going into Parabolica, normally this would be around about the braking marker at the end of the green AstroTurf on the left-hand side. If you're on the inside, then it's going to be slightly earlier than that. But if you're taking an outside line, if somebody's on your inside, then you can brake probably around about the 50, probably around about here, which is enough for you to just get your nose in front. He'll have the inside line, but then what you do then is you try and switch it back. This is not the line you would normally take in a race, so you would have to give him room, but then on exit you would then be able to cut back. He's drifted wide because he's taken the inside line. His exit's going to be compromised. Then hopefully you get close enough to make a move going down the straight into turn 1. So this is what it looks like in practice. This is what I do before every race. I always practice my alternate lines. So we'll brake a little bit later than we normally would. Pretend somebody's on the inside there. Nice and tight on exit. Give them room. Now we'll switch this round. We'll presume somebody's on our right. So we'll brake a tiny bit earlier than we normally would. Nice and tight around this outside. But then we can power on the exit and hopefully get a better exit. Same with Lesmo 1, Lesmo 2. So we'll hold it nice and wide. We can get on the gas early. And same with Lesmo 2. And then I just repeat that for a few laps, switching things round, moving from inside to outside until I'm happy with how the car feels offline, because the grip is different. Now part 2, we're going to cover pit exit and pit entry. Sounds really simple, but you can gain lots of time in the pits if you can nail it. Now what I do beforehand, I switch to the free camera view, which is control F12, control Z. Then I can move the camera around with my mouse. Left mouse button, I can move it forward. And what I do, I like to have a look and see where the cones are for pit entry and have a look at pit road, just so I know, just so I've got an idea what I'm looking for. So there they are here at Monza. So there's the road coming out of Parabolica, a few dotted lines, and there's pit entry. We've got to have our pit limiter on at that point. And pit exit is just beyond where our car is actually parked. And it's the green cones there just on pit exit. Now that's when we can release our pit limiter. So I would normally simulate 2 or 3 pit stops, just making sure that I've got pit entry nailed and pit exit nailed. Now, pit exit, especially at places like Monza, where there's a tight corner immediately after pit exit, you need to practice that and where your braking marker is when you come out of the pits. Because if you're battling for position, it's been a close race, a good exit could mean keeping the guy out of your draft. So you need to accelerate down. Normally, as I mentioned earlier on, my braking marker is 150 or where the grass changes colour. Well, from this side of the circuit, where we've got to be because we're leaving the pits, we can't move over to the left until we've passed the blue cone. That change in colour on the grass is difficult to see, especially if you're looking at your relative, if there's things going on, you're not really going to be paying attention to that. So we need to pick another braking marker on the right hand side. So we exit pit lane or past the cone, and then we can start braking shortly after, because there's potentially got to be somebody on our left hand side. Really, really important to make sure that you can exit the pits at full speed and still make that turn. So we're going to simulate this now. So exit the pits, pit limiter off, full speed, and we're going to try and find our braking marker. So we'll use the blue cone as a reference now, see if we can get it stopped if we brake there. So blue cone. Yep, blue cone does it. Maybe a little bit later, but we know that if we brake at the blue cone, that's going to be safe. So now we'll simulate pit entry. We know where the cones are, we've already checked. There's the dotted line, and then there's the cones shortly after. So we're going to have a look and see where we need to brake. Yeah, that was a little bit too late, just after the dotted line. We may get a penalty there. So if we didn't get it right, I'll just continue through the pit lane, do another lap, and try it again. But it's also a good opportunity to practice your pit exit. Right, so we'll try this again. So we braked just after the dotted line last time. So we'll brake on the dotted line this time. There we go. Perfect. So we know that if we brake on the dotted line entering the pits, we can get it stopped. We know that if we brake at the blue cone on pit exit, we can make turn 1. Now, the last thing that I want to go over is practicing with other cars. Now, when you jump into a practice session or a race session, there are going to be other cars on track. The whole point of practice, in my view, is to practice with other cars and practice what you're going to do in the race. So if I leave the pits, if I am on an out lap, somebody's behind me on a flying lap, yes, on lap 1, I'll move out the way, let them by. But when my tyres are warm, I'll practice as if I'm in a race. That's the whole point. So that's a good opportunity for me to practice my alternate lines, my defensive lines, practice my overtakes. That's the whole point of practice. So don't be afraid to battle with somebody when you're in a practice session. That's the whole point of it. If somebody doesn't like it, well, that's just tough. That's the whole point of practice. So those are my tips for effective practice. So practice first on your own, learn the racing line, get your lap times where you want them to be. Then you can practice your alternate lines, switching those up from lap to lap. So one lap you'll practice the outside line, the next lap on the same turn you'll practice the inside line. Then you can practice your pit entry, pit exit, getting familiar with where the speed restriction cones are, and then practice with other cars as if it was a race. Don't just move out the way, don't make it easy, because that's where you're going to get your best practice. As always, thank you for watching. See you later. Cheers.